you're still watching us here on The Daily Debate, and I'm still very much delighted to have joining me in the studio this evening His Excellency Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you once again, Your Excellency. Now, let's just reflect on the visit in general and start by asking you about how do you perceive the importance in terms of Egypt and France making it very clear in front of the world that they are on the same path and on the same mutual level when it comes to the political files concerning the Middle East region, and on top of them, of course, terrorism. What can you tell us on a general scoop?
Let me first start by saying, during this visit, the President has addressed France as a whole. He had talks with the President, with the Prime Minister, with the head of the Senate. That's on the political level. And then you had on the economic level, he had talks with industrial giants like the Airbus Industries, like Group Rafale, and Dassault. And he even extended this out of France to the whole Western Alliance with a meeting with the President of OECD, which is the economic chapter of the Western Alliance. I think this is very important that you are addressing the whole spectrum in France. I think also the importance of the visit comes from and also he addressed the French people.
Yes, of course.
Through his interview with Le
yes.
Figaro, one of the largest circulating newspapers
in France. Yes.
In France. Let me tell you, the importance of the visits comes from several factors. First of all, France is a major player on the international arena. It is a permanent member in the Security Council. France also is a pivotal country. France and Egypt are both pivotal countries in the Mediterranean basin. The Mediterranean basin at this juncture of time is a very critical region in the world. You started by having, the flux of refugees from North Africa to Southern Europe. And then you have a very critical situation in Lebanon. You have a very critical situation in Syria. You have a very critical situation in Libya. You have a very critical situation in the Eastern Mediterranean due to the irresponsible acts of Turkey threatening,
You've got the gas exploration, yes, exactly.
In the Eastern Mediterranean. This makes the Mediterranean basin a very
important
pivotal point. We have spoken about terrorism. Terrorism is very active now in Libya. You have Turkey transporting mercenaries, arms, and funds from Syria to Libya, and even from Syria to Azerbaijan, threatening the whole world. The danger of terrorism cannot be contained in one region.
Definitely not, yes.
The United States at a certain time recruited people to go to fight in Afghanistan. It was a breeding bed for terrorism. And Afghanistan is thousands of miles separated from the United States.
Definitely, yes.
And yet this terrorism has struck from Afghanistan to New York on the 9th of September. This shows you that it is a global phenomenon. You cannot contain it except by the determination and the forming a solid international front against this scourge.
Yes. Allow me to interrupt you there, and let's focus furthermore, since you've spoken about terrorism now. And the French leader Macron has also expressed his inspiration about how Egypt is very much of a strategic partner and also performing a very successful role in eliminating and combating terrorism, whether it's in Sinai part or even in controlling its borders and ensuring that it controls its borders on the Mediterranean and along the borders with Libya, which extends more than 1,200 kilometers, and that's quite a big area to control. But also the president, in return, in the press conference, spoke about how terrorism, as you've said, has become an international phenomena and has extended its arms reach to France, with the Brotherhood terrorism organization having those extremist ideologies implemented in France. And we have seen a lot of terrorist attacks happening in France, even on an individual level. Again, what kind of cooperation could we see upcoming between France and Egypt to further eliminate and combat terrorism on both countries, and also be able to create this safe haven zone, as you've said earlier, to ensure that it is securing the Mediterranean region?
Indeed, I mean, we have to take into consideration that there are circles that are trying to sabotage Egypt's relations
with France
and with other countries. I think one of the most important measures that has resulted from this visit is what President Macron said when he said that Egypt is in the forefront in the war against terrorism. We cannot deny it arms, we cannot deny it the means to play its role in the war against terrorism. I think this is a very important statement by a permanent member in the Security Council, stressing Egypt's pivotal and crucial role in the war against terrorism. I think, you know, the war against terrorism is now concentrated in Libya. I think France is one of the major countries that has criticized severely Turkey's
Yes, and we've seen even the situation been very tense as well between Turkey and France. We've seen statements here and there. Yes. Libya.
The region of the Middle East. I mean, not only in the Mediterranean, but it goes on to Syria. As I told you, it goes on to Azerbaijan. This, I think, is a very also important and significant political declaration. In addition to Libya, there is the Sahel and Sahara, where also we have problems there.
Yes, of
and France is active there in combating terrorism. Combating terrorism, I mean, primarily needs cooperation in the intelligence field, so as to be one step ahead of the terrorists and to abort any attempt at destabilizing.
Now, to abortion, and before we move to another file, still continuing with terrorism and speaking of aborting or being one step ahead, as you've correctly said, in cooperation with intelligence between these countries. But Egypt is possibly and probably the only country that has a very clear and firm stance when it comes to terrorism, and had also spoken many times on eliminating the roots of terrorism and stopping the fundings of terrorists to terrorists. And we've seen that many countries on different occasions have various interests when it comes to these terrorist organizations' presence at different parts of the world. But Egypt has a very firm stance with that. After this visit, how do you see France pushing up, and France being a very important key player in Europe, along with Germany, in taking a further step to stopping the funds to these terrorist organizations, which is basically what's giving them or reviving them and giving them more power throughout the world?
Let me tell you, I think also one of the very important results of this visit is what have been said about stopping the hate speech and the hate rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
In hate rhetoric is a major instigator of violence and a major instigator of terrorism. And this is what the president has clarified, in this controversy. And I think it was very opportune that we have spoken very honestly and very clearly over that, the difference between, what Mr. Macron said, that we put the individual above religion. Mm-hmm. And the president said, no, we put religion, our ethics puts religion first. You can put whatever you like first, but
respect other people's, yes,
the perspective
of other people
and the belief of the other. Mm-hmm. When somebody
insults
beliefs, it is very easily for those who pull the strings of terrorism
to use it, of course,
to manipulate young people, people who are not enlightened, to commit terrorism. So this is even, not also between Muslims and non-Muslims, between Muslims and another.
Of course, yes.
Part of the hate rhetoric that is being produced by extremists. They do not respect other Muslims' way of worshiping God.
Exactly, of course.
So this instigates, and this led to the atrocity that has been committed in the mosque.
And I think it was a good opportunity, as you've correctly said, that the president made this clear. And also it was very interesting how Macron also wanted to make another statement and ensuring that this is not, as you said, a state's opportunity. This is an individual freedom of expressing himself or themselves, whether it's an institution or a magazine or a newspaper. I want to go, before we move to other files, again, other statements that, because France is always very interested in a lot of things concerning Egypt, and not just on the visit itself. And maybe when we reflect back on one of the questions that were asked by the journalist to President Assisi in Le Figaro, specifically on Ethiopia, an Ethiopian file, the president said that the Nile water is vital to Egypt, of course, confirming that the filling of the dam unilaterally is violating the principles and rules of international law, and which is supplying for 100 million people. And the president is always keen to speak on the behalf of 100 million people on various occasions, specifically during the step. What is expected from the international community in this respect concerning, because as you've said, France is a permanent member at the UN Security Council, and Egypt did file off this issue of Ethiopian dam to the UN Security Council several months ago, but still there has not been any concrete decision and support that has been taken by the UN, which France is part of, in terms of the Ethiopian file. Do you think that after this visit possibly things might change?
I hope so, in the sense that one of the steps that needs to be taken is for all peace-loving countries, countries that are looking for stability and for the welfare of people, is to advise Ethiopia that intransigence leads to animosity and leads in the end to instability. The attitude of the Ethiopian government, not only in the case of the Renaissance Dam, but also in the case of how it deals with its internal problems. Its intransigence with the Tigray has led to the catastrophic situation that is prevalent in Ethiopia today, and bloodshed and destruction and mayhem. So, I mean, what we need today is for our friends to convince Ethiopia that if it continues with its intransigence over the issue of the Nile waters, this will lead to instability not only in Egypt and Ethiopia, but in the whole of the Nile basin, in the whole of the Horn of Africa, and indeed in the whole of Africa.
Speaking of Africa, and as you've said correctly, that France basically is one of the countries that is very much concerned with many parts of Africa. And as we also speak of Ethiopia and the tripartite country, including Sudan, France has supported Egypt in its stance concerning the reconciliation process that took place in South Sudan. We've seen a president who held recently a one-day visit at South Sudan to attend a summit. And especially as France was one of the supporting beginning countries that wanted this separation to happen and for South Sudan to gain its independence. Again, how does that reflect the Egyptian foreign policy and the strength of the Egyptian leadership today in front of the whole world, especially when we're talking about world powers like France?
Let me tell you that maybe, the president's visit to France has shadowed another very important event. At the same time, there was held a conference where the Prime Minister has deputized for the President in giving Egypt's word in a conference over the silencing of the guns in Africa. And this is an issue which has been proposed during Egypt's presidency of the African Union. The silencing of the gun. You cannot have stability, you cannot have peace, you cannot have development with the guns speaking. If you have conflict, if you have war, you will never achieve development and you will never achieve prosperity. If you look at Africa, Africa is one of the richest continents in the world with its resources. It has everything you can think of. It has gold, it has diamonds, it has copper, it has tremendous agricultural potential, a tremendous animal husbandry potential. It has tremendous potential for producing electricity out of the hydroelectric projects. It has everything that makes a rich continent, yet it is actually one of the poorest
continent
parts of the world because of instability, because of tribalism, because of civil wars. If you look at
and sabotaging, of course, these resources without any mutual benefit for developing Africa.
Indeed.
In return, definitely.
Indeed. So I mean, this is Africa on Egypt's agenda is one of the priorities because I mean we are part of Africa. We are Africans. Egypt has been one of the founding members of the Organization of African Unity, which has become today the African Union. Egypt has spearheaded the move to independence in Africa. Egypt has spearheaded the economic recovery of Africa after the termination of colonialism. The Al Nasr Company for Imports and Exports, which was active in Africa, has a tremendous role, which is unfortunately not remembered today. And I think this is something the media should take care of. I mean, what this company and what Egypt has done for supporting the African economies in its initial days, after the end of colonialism, a great African man, Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, he published a very important book, the new colonialism, a new phase of imperialism, which shows that, kicking out the occupying armies and having a flag and the national anthem and the president
And borders,
does
yes.
not mean that you are independent.
Definitely not.
So long as you are bind to your formal colonial power, your independence is not complete.
That's true. If we look after these 3-4 days of the visit and echoing back on the international media and newspapers and journalism and how they preview this visit, they all speak about the Egyptian strength and position, and how this is a golden opportunity for France itself and not Egypt in this regard to benefit from this strengthened relationship and position and power that Egypt has regained back again, whether it's as part of being a Horn of Africa or the gateway to the Middle East and to the Mediterranean. How are these statements being and these analyses being reflected here in Egypt? How is the relationship between France and Egypt today a golden opportunity for France and not just for Egypt as it was traditionally or has been traditionally known to?
Let me thank you for raising this issue, because I sometimes feel dismayed how the media handles this case. That, Egypt, has gained by the French rapprochement with Egypt and how this is a great opportunity for Egypt. No.
It's a great opportunity for France instead.
Egypt is a pivotal country. Egypt is a great power in the regional spectrum. You cannot form meaningful relations with Africa or with the Arab world or even with the Islamic world without Egypt.
Definitely not.
So this is, I think, if France takes a step towards Egypt, this is a great benefit for France. It is, I do not deny that we gain. As I told you, France is an important country. France is a permanent member of the United Nations. France is an industrial country.
But the situation in the Middle East and the region is different today, and Egypt is on a different
great
position.
Power, a great regional power, and I can say without any hesitation, a great international power.
Definitely, of course.
Egypt has been one of the founders of the United Nations. Egypt has been a founder of the great third world organizations, African Unity, Arab League, the non-aligned movement, and all of this. This Egypt is not a country to be trifled with. Egypt, as I say, is a great power, regionally and without hesitation, I say internationally.
Well, we're going to still continue on with the visit and echoing back on the reflection of the important messages that have been echoing out from this visit of President Sisi to France. Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, former Assistant to Foreign Minister, allows to go to this short break. We'll be back right after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back again. You're still watching us here on the Daily Debate. Still delighted very much and honoured to have you joining me here, Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, former Assistant to the Foreign Minister. Let's talk about the peace process. And again, on every visit, in every agenda that is being held, whether it's for someone visiting Egypt or for the President visiting on an external visit outside, the peace process is always being brought up. And it's very ironic, while everybody wants a justified settlement for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, yet still we see countries that have different perspectives of it. When it comes to the notion of peace, France has tried to mediate between the Palestinians and the Israelis previously, but Egypt has and will always have this firm stance concerning the situation. How have they both, Egypt and France, in terms of common grounds or differences, even if they do have, concerning the peace process from your perspective?
I think that Egypt and France both adhere to the Charter of the United Nations to international legality, which is demonstrated through the Security Council resolutions. The Security Council resolutions are a basis for the settlement of the Palestinian Israeli
Conflict.
or the Palestinian Arab conflict
Of course.
in general. It stipulates the withdrawal of Israel from
67
occupied
borders.
territory. It stipulates the right of the Palestinians to return
Refugees.
to their country. It stipulates the right of the Palestinians to have their
Independent.
country. Indeed, you know, the legal basis of Israel is the partition of Palestine, which stipulates a Jewish country and an Arab country. And since, you know, in 1967, with the occupation of the Arab lands, the Security Council resolutions dictate the withdrawal of Israel to the pre-1967 borders. All of this is international legality. Egypt and France abide by international legality. The President al-Sisi, a couple of days ago, he said that the Palestinian issue is one of the priorities of Egypt's foreign policy. As I said, you know, about Ethiopia and the instability that is created by the intransigence of Ethiopia. You cannot have lasting peace in the Middle East without a just settlement for the Palestinian problem, without creating what international legality and international law and the Security Council resolutions of creating a Palestinian state and the right of Palestinians to live with dignity.
If we also want to talk about the interview, going back again to President Sisi's interview at Le Figaro newspaper, and when he spoke about the Middle East and the stability as well as the civil security, he mentioned that they are the most valuable thing for people, and that the reforms in the fields of education, health, and housing sectors are a practical expression of Egypt's adherence to preserving the citizens' rights. For a country that views civil rights and freedom very differently than the reality and how it's reflected here in Egypt, how do you see the president for the first time being very firm and to the point when he replied back concerning the rights and the civil rights in Egypt, whether to Le Figaro or at the press conference itself?
Civil rights and human rights are an international issue. If you look at affluent countries, civil rights there is your right to oppose the government in whatever way. The economic issue, the basic needs of a human being are secondary. In our part of the world, health, food, education are the basic. You can't have human rights for somebody who can't find his meal for the day, who can't
I think
get
that's a basic of any human being, sir, whether you're
proper
here or anywhere.
treatment. who doesn't have proper housing. If you
Health
look at
as well.
Egypt's experience, where in very few years we have launched a war against disease, virus C, bilharzia. The campaign to protect women from breast cancer. All of this is basic human rights. The new housing that
Yes,
has
to
been
eliminate slums and yes.
being built for the less fortunate people. This is basic human rights. You have to understand that personal and historical aspects. I mean, a very potent example is in Western Europe, marriage between a man and a man and the woman is
It's human rights for them, yeah.
for them. Yet they prohibit a man to marry more than one wife. I mean, they have to understand our religion. They have to understand
Our culture,
our social
it's culture as well.
and
yes.
culture, so as to be able to have mutual understanding and mutual respect.
Yes, and clarity too.
In our part of the world, maybe security has a high value. But this is because, you know, if somebody is sick, the most important person in his life becomes the doctor.
Of course.
If he is facing bankruptcy, his accountant will be the most important thing. If he is facing a legal matter, his lawyer becomes. In our part of the world, security is a major threat. And therefore, security issues have a certain priority.
Yes.
Egypt is not like Switzerland or like Sweden, where, you know, the society is tranquil. You know, even, you know, in France, although they had, you know, some incidents, but they remain incidents. What we have in our part of the world is a war.
Big difference, definitely, definitely. In the press conference that was also held between President Macron and President Sisi, they have talked about the crisis and the situation in Lebanon. And France is very keen for stability in Lebanon, unlike any other country that had showed that in a very clear manner. We've seen Macron on a visit twice to Lebanon in this regard. But also Egypt has provided a lot of humanitarian aid, speaking of human rights again, to the people of Lebanon by sending cargoes and airlifts back and forth with humanitarian aids and healthcare stuff like that. If we talk about the role that Egypt can play with the help of France to stabilize or to ensure the stability of Lebanon, which is on the brink of not just political collapse, but also an economic crisis.
You know, sending humanitarian aid, sending economic aid, helps to alleviate the symptoms of the disease.
Of course.
But there is a disease in Lebanon. There is sectarianism. There is external interference. If you look at the arena in Lebanon, you'll find Israel is involved, you'll find Iran is involved, you'll find the Europeans are involved, you'll find several Arab countries are involved, and not to alleviate the situation, but they are behind several factions. Several of them have become armed. and are fighting one another. This has to stop.
But I mean, allow me to further clarify here, and I mean, take from you further clarification concerning this issue particular, because I remember back in 2006, was it, or 2007, and I mean, knowing that Lebanon is one of the countries that have had a lot of civil wars throughout history. It took them a lot of effort, and I'm talking about the Arab League here in Egypt, to reach this settlement where they have this division, this factional division, very tight up, and put it together in a certain format. So, and ever since that was approved and agreed by mediation from the Arab League and several countries, they've managed to put them together in this form until, of course, the explosion that happened at Lebanon's port, and then everything collapsed, and we saw this huge vacuum that took place. How can Egypt, with its strength and its experience and its effective pivotal role, as you said, really help in lifting this crisis that's happening internally in Lebanon?
Let me tell you something. I would hesitate very much to put, that the Arab League has put this sectarian phenomenon. No.
No, it didn't. Did I say that? That's not what I said.
No. But that the Arab League has made a contribution in order that they can coexist with one another. The problem goes further back, before you were born or before even I was born. In the mid-19th century, France was nearly dominating trade with Lebanon. The British were not happy with that, and they instigated a war between the Maronites, who were pro-French, and the Druze, who were being supported by the British. And since then, there has been the conflict between the two factions. Then in 1958, there was the first civil war, when Camille Chamoun, his term of presidency expired and he refused
to leave,
as Mr. Trump is doing today, to leave, and he asked for help of the Americans, and they sent the Sixth Fleet, and there was a civil war. Egypt at that time, 1958, intervened and settled the question. Also in the 1920s, with the French occupation, they made a census and said that so much percentage is Maronite, so much percentage is Sunni, so much percentage is Shiite. And according to that, they instigated that the president is Maronite, the prime minister is Muslim Sunni, the head of the parliament is Muslim Shia. You can't have that. And what has accentuated the problem is that these percentages have changed drastically. And Lebanon did not have a census from 1922 until today, which is nearly 100 years.
Exactly.
So this is the core of the problem, that you have hereditary barons who want to keep their baroncies, and they are exploiting their communities. This is the real and the crux of the problem in Lebanon. You have to end this satirical situation in governing a country.
And how do you see this happening, or coming towards any kind of resolution happening in the near future, with France still insisting to ensure, as it says, or secure the stability of Lebanon? How is this going to happen, especially with the continued political vacuum, as I said, and a very, very doubtful economic crisis?
I think it is up to the Lebanese people. I am surprised. The Lebanese people are a glorious people. They are wonderful people.
And they love life, despite everything.
The best poets, the best journalists,
singers,
singers, actors, and they are a wonderful cultured and civilized people. How can they permit their country to degenerate into such a chaos? It is up to these artists, journalists, intellectuals, historians to
Yes, to leave
put
the
sense
sectarian
into the head of the
yes,
politicians,
and,
or replace these politicians
and put
with
the
a new
sectarian
generation.
or beliefs and ethnic backgrounds
Indeed,
aside.
indeed.
Unfortunately, our time is up. Ambassador Mohamed Shazly, former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you very much for joining
I
me.
am very sorry that my time is off.
I'm very
I would
sorry
have loved
too.
to stay several more hours with you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you. Bless you. And that brings us to the end of our episode of The Daily Debate. Thank you for watching.